everyone. Thanks for joining me at the first ever Lensbaby conference. I'm excited to be sharing two of my greatest passions with you today, photographing flowers and photographing with Lensbaby lenses. Today my presentation is called Finding Your Heart, Creating Flower Portraits with Emotion, Impact, and Joy. I'm joining you today from my home in the Chicago area. I am so fortunate to live 10 minutes from one of the most beautiful botanic gardens in the world, the Chicago Botanic Garden. Much of my work comes from this garden, and about 90% of my work is photographed with Lensbaby lenses. All the images you see today were captured with a variety of Lensbabies. I know you can't see me during this presentation. I really want you to focus on my story and on my images, and I will look forward to seeing you live in the Q&A session at the end of my presentation. So let's get started. My presentation today is about bringing your heart into your journey of photography. I formed this presentation around the ideas I gathered from a book I read about 2 years ago, The Alchemist, a book written by Brazilian author Paulo Coelho that was published in 1988. This book had long been on my wish list of books to read, but I feel like it was fateful that I discovered the beauty of this book at a time when it resonated with me deeply. At that time, I was doing a lot of soul searching about my personal journey in photography. Let me explain a little bit about the story of The Alchemist so that makes sense. The Alchemist is an allegory. It's a story with many hidden meanings about our journey of life. It is the story of finding your personal legend, of growth, of working in destiny with all things, and a story of the harmony of nature. The story follows the journey of an Andalusian shepherd boy named Santiago. Santiago decides to leave his predictable life as a sheep herder and seek a treasure. This treasure was foretold to him by a gypsy fortune teller, and it was to be found buried near the pyramids in Egypt. Along the way, Santiago meets people who help him and those who hinder him in his journey. He meets Fatima, the love of his life, and the all-important character, the wise alchemist. As the journey for the treasure unfolds, Santiago learns many lessons in life. Most importantly, that by following his heart, he can find his treasure. Many of the lessons of this book I find strikingly similar to my journey in photography. Let me share some of what Santiago discovers through his journey, through quotes from the book, and then my thoughts about those. When a person really desires something, all the universe conspires to help that person to realize his dream, said the alchemist. So we all have a personal legend to pursue. Our personal legend is our destiny, our dream. According to the alchemist, we must listen to the clues of the universe to help us realize that dream. There is a harmony in nature and a universal language that will help guide us as it did for Santiago. Pursue your dreams by following your heart. You will never be able to escape from your heart, so it's better to listen to what it has to say, says the alchemist. So what does all this mean to photography, you might wonder? To me, it has many meanings. It means being more aware of the emotions and the connections to our subjects. It means learning about yourself in the process. It's about creating art that reflects your heart and your vision of the world. And through that deeper connection, begin to enjoy the process of creating more. For me, the process of creating is more important than the image that I create. Does this mean that every subject is going to have deep symbolic meaning? No, not necessarily, but it will help us find beauty in the tiniest of places, to feel a connection to our subject, and then to be able to show that miraculous beauty to others. Why do we have to listen to our hearts, the boy asked. Remember that wherever your heart is, there you will find your treasure. You've got to find the treasure so that everything you have learned along the way makes sense. Your personal journey is unique to you and to you only. So on that personal journey, you need to bring your emotional roadmap. Now, you may be asking, what is an emotional roadmap? Well, this is a term that I created to understand how we view the world, each of us personally. I believe that our view of the world is a culmination of everything that we've experienced in life, every joy, every love, every loss, every relationship that we've experienced, even down to the small things, every book you've read, every movie you've seen, even the music you listen to. It all feeds into how we view the world and how we see through the lens of our camera. To understand our individual roadmap, we need to honor where we come from. We need to understand what draws us to our subject matter and how your personal history shapes the way that you see the world. I'll give you some personal examples from my own self-exploration. So I grew up surrounded by nature in a small town where I could easily play in the woods, explore and hike in beautiful natural places. I had one of these magic, unhurried childhoods, and I relished being outdoors in nature. I was a collector of natural things, and I loved looking at the world up close. Now, this translates into my passion for doing macro photography today and wanting to draw your eye to the tiniest of details in nature. I also grew up in the arts, studying the visual arts as well as being fascinated with art history. I got my first camera at age 10, and I began that lifelong love early on. I also studied ballet. My fascination with the grace, the sense of movement, and the beautiful lines of flowers relates to that memory of all those ballet movements. Those movements and how they feel become a part of your soul. And flowers often remind me of dancers, of tiny ballerinas. One more example. For my early career as an art therapist, I bring art therapy into my photography today. It's a huge part of what I do, how I see my work, and how I love to teach others. I believe that creating art is therapeutic. And by acknowledging and learning from the feelings and stories that emerge in the process of creating an image, we can better understand ourselves and even heal ourselves. So I'll tell you a little bit about this image and why it was so healing for me. This is an image that I created about an hour after I had dropped my family off at the airport, my daughter's son-in-law and my granddaughter. And it was a very sad goodbye. We had had a wonderful week-long visit, just a wonderful time together, and it was very hard to see them off and say goodbye. So after I got home from the airport, I packed up my backpack and headed to the Chicago Botanic Garden, because this always makes me feel better to be in nature and doing what I love to do. So the first garden that I headed to was a garden that's filled with dahlias, and I wanted to see what was blooming because this is one of my favorite flowers. So this was the first thing that caught my eye, and it felt to me like my family leaving with their backs turned, with my granddaughter right in the middle there like she always is. This comforted me. It made me feel a connection to them and serves as a reminder of that wonderful visit and how I miss them when I'm not with them. So again, our art can help us understand our emotions, process those emotions, and heal us. So be uniquely you. Your personal legend is unique to you. Your power, and I underline the word power, lies in being uniquely you. Follow your dreams with a passion, a determination, and most importantly, by listening to your heart. Learn to focus on your own unique journey. Be inspired to be different. Don't let the fear of others' opinions dictate your art. Gather ideas and learn from others, that's very important. But then use those ideas to inspire your own personal journey. Most of all, don't let others dictate your journey or influence your feelings about your work. Stay true to what your heart tells you. And if someone else doesn't like your work, so be it. You only need to please yourself. You're going to meet a lot of obstacles during your journey, just as Santiago did. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to take risks. You're going to experience a lot of self-doubt. All artists do. But you need to listen to your heart to overcome fear and to persevere. There's only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. Don't give in to your fears. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. Again, very important advice from the alchemist to Santiago. Mistakes are a necessary part of our journey. They are opportunities to learn. So take risks and be willing to fail. Pay attention to what your heart is telling you. When an image takes your breath away, that's a clue that you photographed from your heart. So this image represents all that to me. This is an older image that I took early in my journey with the Velvet 56. And these are flowers that I had never photographed with a Lensbaby up until this point. I had always photographed them with more traditional macro lenses, very much fully in focus, anything from f/16 to f/32. I wanted to capture all the details of these amazing flowers. But I had hundreds of these images, and I walked into the greenhouse on this particular day and I said, I don't want to do it that way. I'm bored. When you do something over and over and over again, you can hit a creative slump. You can become bored, and that's where you need to step outside your box, outside your comfort zone, and try something new. So I put the velvet on this day and just started playing. I honestly didn't think that this was going to work. I thought it was going to be a big mistake and that I was going to go home with nothing. But I was willing to take that risk. And, so be it. If I go home and nothing works, that's okay. I learned something and I can try again. But I got home, got this on my computer screen, and I started to tear up. And I heard myself gasp. Oh, I love this. And that was my clue. That when you hear yourself have an emotional reaction to an image, you need to pay attention to that, because that's your heart talking. So, yes, I know that not everyone likes this image. I've actually gotten some criticism about this image. People say, I like your cactus flowers sharply in focus. That's okay. This image speaks to me, and that's what's most important. The secret of life is to fall 7 times and to get up 8 times, says the alchemist. Very important advice. We're going to make those mistakes. We're going to fall down many, many times. You should see all the mistakes in my Lightroom catalog. You see my finished work, the things that were successes, but I have many mistakes. But the important thing is that I get up and try again and persevere. And find joy each and every day. This is advice that I try to follow every day of my life. And I will admit that it's been very hard during the pandemic to find that joy. We're all filled with anxiety, with fear, with the unknown, with the terrible sense of loss that has been experienced all over the world. But even in the midst of all this adversity, it's important to find joy. And my photography has allowed me to do that. But it means that I need to photograph what I love and in a way that brings me joy. The simple things are the most extraordinary things, and only the wise can see them. This is one of my favorite quotes from the book because it really resonates with me in a number of different ways. For me, looking for the simple, the tiny details of nature, that's what I thrive on. And then bringing those to your eyes. These are the extraordinary things. These are called Japanese beauty berries, and they're very tiny. They're easily overlooked. I watch many people walk right by these, never knowing that they're there. But they're amazing when you get in close and look at them. They're just so beautiful. But I also think that we can really apply this to our life in general, that it's the simple things. It's not the things that we own, the material things. It's not the cars that we drive or the houses that we live in. It's the things like a hug from a child or a wonderful conversation with a friend that really are the extraordinary things, the things that bring us joy. Butterflies, one of my absolute favorite subjects. And butterflies remind me to look at the world with a sense of awe and wonder. There's such magic around us. Now, I learned this from teaching 3-year-olds. When I was between my work as an art therapist and then going full-time with my photography, I spent about 10, 12 years teaching in a preschool setting. Mostly, I was interested in teaching young children art and supporting their creativity. But in our classroom, we raised butterflies. We saw them from caterpillar to chrysalis to the emergence of the butterfly, and then we released them outdoors when they were fully emerged. And this was the most miraculous process in the eyes of a 3-year-old. And when I watched them watch this process, it made me realize that we need to look at the world through those eyes, at everything that we look at. Just imagine seeing this process for the very first time. So when I'm out in nature photographing, I do try to look at my subjects as if I've never seen them before, as if they are truly a miracle. 3-year-olds can teach us a lot about life, and I feel very blessed to have spent so much time with them, both in the children I taught, my own children, and now I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. So I want to talk a little bit about fostering creativity because this is a huge part of my personal journey as an artist. I studied creativity in graduate school, and I was fascinated with how it is at its peak in early childhood, and then it begins to diminish with age. I believe that we have the capacity to be creative, each and every one of us. And there's a lot of myths about creativity. People feel that either you're blessed with it or you're not. But I believe that we are all creative beings. We just need to learn how to unleash it. And as I said, creativity is really at its peak during those early childhood years. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, they are really creative geniuses. But it does begin to go underground as we get older. And we can bring this back above ground and allow it to bloom just like a flower. But it comes from hard work and experimentation. And I have lots of ideas about how to bring creativity back into your work, but we need to give it time. It's a part of our journey. So we need to adopt a slow and mindful approach. This is going to help the creativity emerge. Establish a workflow that allows you to be more mindful, to connect with your subject, and then to ask a lot of what ifs. So when I begin my field work with any subject, I ask myself a lot of questions. First of all, I want to know what's drawing me to this subject. What's catching my eye? Is it a story that's emerging? Is there an emotion that I feel? Or is it simply just a beautiful curve or some detail within that subject that really is drawing me in and giving me this sense of awe about it? So then I began a process of what if? And those what ifs include things like, what would happen if I shot it at this aperture? Or what would happen if I used this lens? Or what would happen if I changed my position a little bit? Would my background change? Or what if I got around to the side or even the back of the flower? What would that look like? So I'm thinking a lot before I even pick up my camera. And then I begin that process of experimentation. But this takes a slow and mindful approach. Find a subject that speaks to you, that elicits an emotion, a story, or simply draws you in with its beauty, grace, or personality. When something speaks to you, listen. Listen with your whole heart, because it's usually coming from your heart. And be playful in your approach. Think and play like that 3-year-old, because young children are at their creative peak, as I mentioned before. They experiment, they tinker, they make mistakes, and then they try again. But they have a joyful way of experimenting. And when they make those mistakes, they just keep at it, and they don't worry about what other people are thinking. It's all about their play. I want to talk a little bit more about art as therapy, because this has been even more important to me during the pandemic. It's always been a part of my photography from the very beginning, before I even realized how much my art therapy background influenced my photography, and then ultimately influenced my teaching. But it became incredibly important to help me get through this difficult 9 months that we've all experienced. We've experienced a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, this huge sense of loss. But art can help heal us. It can help us better understand those emotions and learn about our inner selves, and thus bring our hearts to our work. So I call this image, "We're in this together." And this was created in April, in the heart of the pandemic. And it became a very symbolic and important image to me about how we all are in this together. We're all struggling, we're all suffering, and we can all support each other. So I want to share with you a little bit about how I overcame some of that during this time of adversity, how I was able to find beauty and to experience joy at a time when I couldn't go to the botanic garden. You know, I had become very dependent on traveling 10 minutes to this garden and having millions of subjects at my footsteps. But all of a sudden, I was limited to photographing in my yard and in my neighborhood. And so I began what I called my neighborhood walks during this time, after shelter in place was issued in our area. And, you know, I was really sad about not being able to go to the garden, because I knew the tulips were blooming, spring was emerging. This is my favorite time of the year. I just love spring. And that was hard. That was very hard. But as I say, I do try to find joy in each and every day. And so I went out into my neighborhood. Every day I went out, rain or shine, unless it was pouring, I was out. And I would sometimes go out for hours. I would walk miles, and I was stunned at what I found. This is a neighborhood that I've lived in for over 30 years. And I had kind of disconnected from it because, again, it's so easy to get into my car and go to a place that I love. But now I couldn't do that. So I rediscovered my neighborhood, and I found such joy. This is a tulip that was photographed in a public park just about a mile from my home. I walked some days for miles. It was wonderful exercise. It was my time in nature. It was my therapy. It's what really helped me get through this time. And I really, have encouraged others to do this too. I know many people have not picked up their cameras. And I say, get out. There's beauty everywhere. And even in the winter, you can find the beauty. This was my across the street neighbor who had the most beautiful patch of tulips lining the sidewalk of her front yard. I had never noticed these tulips before. And, I took this one image with the Sol 45 just so you could see the larger view, and I love the blur that it brought to this image. But then I was down on the ground exploring each of these tulips, up close, and I love the way this one was just kind of leaned over as if she was resting after her morning shower. It had rained that morning before I went out for my walk. And I emailed my neighbor, even though I was sitting on the sidewalk, which is a public area. I emailed her and I said, if you see someone sitting out there for 2 hours at a time, you'll know it's me, because I spent a lot of time exploring the tulips. There were magnolias everywhere in the neighborhood. I was stunned with how many I found. And crocuses, this is also in another across the street neighbor's yard. And I emailed her because they were not easily accessible from the sidewalk, which is usually where I was photographing. I did not step into people's yards unless I had permission. But I emailed her and said, do you mind if I photograph your crocuses? And they were out of town, so she said, have at it. You can photograph anything in the yard. And then irises. I found more irises in my neighborhood than they have at Chicago Botanic Garden, and in every color of the rainbow. They were just spectacular. Clematis is a flower that blooms later in the spring, usually late May, early June. And I love these flowers, and I know exactly where to go find them at Chicago Botanic. I photograph them every year. But I wasn't finding them in my neighborhood, and that was, kind of a disappointment. But then one day I walked even a little farther, and I found a public park that had a bush. And when I first saw them, there were only a few blooms. And then I went back a few days later and there were more. And I went back a week later and there were hundreds of blooms. So I spent a lot of time with these flowers, and they were right there. I could get very close to them. These are crab apples that were in a courtyard in a building just a block from my home. And I had no idea these were there. This is a place, we call it our community house, where, I've taken my children there hundreds of times for birthday parties. We've gone to weddings and funerals and classes there. And I never knew there were crab apples lining this courtyard. They were just absolutely beautiful. This is from my own yard. I had never photographed the daffodils in my yard. I just didn't find them a particularly appealing flower to photograph. And, but when that's what you have, that's what you try to photograph. And I loved playing with this flower because yellow is a difficult flower to photograph. So I played with it in black and white and happened to catch it after a rainfall. Grape hyacinth in my yard, and more ferns for my yard. And I loved the way the ferns, this brought forth a story. I call this I'm Here for You, because it reminded me of a parent just comforting a child. Lilacs. This was probably one of my favorite finds in the neighborhood, because this is at the playground of the preschool where I used to teach. And it's probably about 4 or 5 blocks from my home. And I had forgotten about these lilacs. They as I said, line this playground, and we would take the children outside to play every day. And the smell was just incredible. but I was walking in that general neighborhood, and all of a sudden I could smell them, and it brought back that memory. And I said, those are the lilacs at the preschool. So I went over and started to photograph them and went back many times. Generally on these walks, I was just taking one lens. I was trying to keep this simple. When I photograph at Chicago Botanic, I have a whole backpack full of gear with me. But on these walks, I wanted it to be simple and joyful, and it was just as much about getting exercise and being in nature as doing my photography. So, oftentimes I would go back to places over and over again and try different lenses. And then probably one of the most joyous things that happened during the pandemic was meeting my friend Karen. And Karen lives about 4 blocks from me and has the most beautiful dahlia garden I have ever seen in my life. And I was continuing my neighborhood walks even after the Botanic Garden opened back up in the summer. I still continued, especially on the weekends when the garden tended to be a little more crowded, to go out and photograph in the neighborhood because I had found so much. I had found so many wonderful things. So one day I found myself strangely pulled in a direction that I don't normally walk. It's you have to cross a busy street, and it's just a neighborhood where I previously hadn't found much. But here I am face to face with this amazing dahlia garden, and my jaw was dropped. And as I'm standing there just trying to digest who's growing these beautiful dahlias, they were prize winning, and she had hundreds of them lining the sidewalk for everyone in the neighborhood to enjoy. She drives up, gets out of her car, and introduces herself. And that was the start of an amazing friendship between the two of us. Someone who loves to grow dahlias with all her heart, and someone who loves photographing dahlias with all her heart. And we have just become fast and wonderful friends. And even though the dahlia season is long over, we continue to message each other every day to dream about next year. She's going to start a dahlia farm, and we have all sorts of ideas that we want to do to work together. And I'm teaching her how to photograph her flowers. She's teaching me all about growing dahlias. And every time I went back to photograph, she would always send me home with a bundle of dahlias to photograph at home and to enjoy. It was, I'm not sure I would have ever met her had it not been for this unusual time that we're in. And I'm so grateful. I'm just incredibly grateful. So how do Lensbaby lenses help shape my personal journey? Because I will say that these are a huge part of my journey in photography and of where I am today with my photography. And I'm so grateful for that too. So Lensbaby lenses help me connect emotionally with my subject and photograph in a way that expresses that emotion. Now, I think you've already gathered that that is the number one, the most important part of my photography, is bringing that emotional piece into my photography. And when I look through these lenses, they take my breath away when I see the beautiful artistic effects and the emotion that emerges just from looking through the camera lens. It's very powerful. The lenses help me to shoot what it feels like. We have this wonderful quote by David Allen Harvey: "Don't shoot what it looks like, shoot what it feels like." And these lenses do that because of the beautiful effects that they create. This image is a dahlia from Karen's garden that she sent home with me, and I photographed it in natural light. I got it up on my computer screen, and I could just feel the words coming out of my mouth, the wedding dress. And I realized that there was a lot of emotion behind that. First of all, I was just really amazed at the beautiful blur, the way the Composer Pro with the Sweet 35 optic helped this look like silk. There was an elegance and just a grace about this flower with its, beautiful little curls. We all love dahlia curls. And the emotion behind that was that this made me visualize my daughter in her wedding dress. And this is my daughter, who was supposed to be married in August in Denmark, and we couldn't have the wedding because of the pandemic. She will wear this dress. We will have the wedding. But meanwhile, this image really helps me think of her and gives me hope that that's going to happen. So these lenses really help to bring to life the stories and the emotions that emerge from my subjects. So our photographs can really help us tell the stories that are uniquely ours. Remember, this is our own unique journey. And the way that we see our subjects, again, comes from your emotional roadmap. It comes from the way that you view the world. You may look at these images and see a totally different story than I do. And that's what I love. That's what's so beautiful about art, is that we can all interpret it how it resonates with us emotionally. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about what these three images represent for me. And these were all created during the pandemic. The tulip on the left, I call Give Yourself a Hug. And it's really representative of that feeling of needing to take care of myself, to say it's okay. We're going to get through this. Yes, it's hard to focus right now. It's hard to find that joy, but this was an image that gave me hope that take care of yourself and we're going to get through it. The image in the middle was photographed at Chicago Botanic Garden after I returned in the summer. We were able to go back. We had to make a reservation, wear masks, socially distance, but I was very happy to have my garden back. And this joyful Japanese anemone, or some people call these windflowers, just looked like she was dancing. And I call this We Shall Dance Again, because again, it's that hope that life will come back to normal. The image on the right was created right before we went into lockdown. And I was at a local conservatory that has a beautiful spring flower show. And I knew that this was my last visit before they were going to close down. And so I was filled with a lot of emotion about that. And I was also very unsure about, when am I going to be able to see my family? How are we going to get through all this? And I saw this little family of tulips just cuddled together. And I composed it so that it kind of brought that intimacy to it, just cropping in and really focusing on the interaction of these three tulips. And I think the beautiful thing that happened during the pandemic, if we can, find those little bits of joy, is that immediate families did get to spend more time together, that children were home from school. And I know that wasn't always easy, but families spent more time together. And so this image, again, is representative of that. The beautiful blur created, the way the light and color are rendered by these lenses just brings forth emotion. This was one of my earliest images with the Velvet 56. It was shot at a dahlia show at Chicago Botanic Garden. And, I go into this show every year with the feeling that, maybe I'll get some images I like, but I know that, it's not always going to work because the lighting is terrible. It's very crowded. These dahlias are lined up on tables. The backgrounds are difficult. But I'm always willing to try, and I actually have gotten some wonderful images from this show every year. But this one I got home, again, with that feeling that probably didn't get anything good today. Got this up on the screen and I heard my heart speaking. I just, again, I gasped. I said, how did that happen? Where did that light come from? How did that background happen? Because this is really pretty much straight out of camera, which a lot of my Lensbaby images are they don't require a lot of processing. So this image again just reminded me of the power of these lenses and what they can do to bring that sense of emotion forward. And they unleash creativity. This was also shot at that same Dahlia show on the same day, and I was fascinated with the way this Dahlia looked like flames. And so I began to play around with different lenses and different compositions to try to bring that idea forward. But again, I never know what's going to happen. Some things work, some things don't. So these lenses really encourage me to take those risks and to see my subjects differently. And we are going to talk in a minute about more abstract shooting, which is another reason that I love these lenses. This is a more abstract image because to me it's about the shapes and patterns. They encouraged me to play and experiment. So this is another Dahlia that was from Karin's garden, and it's a cafe au lait, which is, just a beautiful cream-colored Dahlia. But you put these lenses up to your eye, and all of a sudden, the way the light is playing on this flower, the tones that are coming through, just had me mesmerized. So I spent probably a good 2 hours just with this flower, experimenting with it, with different lenses, different compositions. These were all taken in that time period. Very different ways of looking at the Dahlia. So this experimentation is, again, very important to the creative process. So it's key to creativity. This is 2 views of a tulip, and I have many more. I'm just showing you 2, photographed with different Lensbabies. And this was a flower that I spent an hour and a half with, really fully exploring it. So the first image with the Velvet 56 is a more traditional view of a tulip, and actually one that I don't actually do very often because I think tulips have, so many different interesting ways to photograph them and to bring their details to your eye. But I loved the patterning and I loved the color, so I had to photograph it. And you should photograph things every possible way you can think of, because it leads to discovery and it opens up new ways of seeing. But had I not gotten down low and photographed this tulip from the ground level, I would have never seen what was happening in the background, because that was not apparent, when I'm hovering over it. But the background was just magnificent, and that's created by other tulips in the background. So I did a little experiment where I photographed it with a variety of Lensbabies. I wanted to see, which lens is really going to do the best possible background. And the Sol 45 did a great job, as it always does with backgrounds. So Lensbabies really encouraged me to explore the abstract. When I started my photography many years ago, I tended to look at flowers as a whole, and I tended to photograph them fully in focus. It was a much different way of looking at flowers than I do today. It was really more about documenting the flower than seeing inside the flower and discovering the beauty inside. But as I mentioned earlier, when you do something over and over again, you get bored, you hit a creative slump, and I hit a big creative slump. And it was at that time that I decided I was just discovering Lensbabies, and I was beginning to experiment with what I call selective focus, or really just looking into the flower to look for abstract elements and photograph that. So these images are about lines, curves, beautiful, sensuous curves. It's not even important to me that you know this is a rose or a fern, because these are about those beautiful, beautiful curves. Pattern and symmetry. Nature is full of pattern and symmetry. It's everywhere if we look for it. So again, these lenses, you can use them in so many different ways to capture that pattern and symmetry. The image at the top with the Velvet 85, I'm using an aperture of f8 so that I can get more in focus to bring more detail to your eye. But then the two images with the Composer Pro 2 and the Sweet 50 optic, I'm really showing you I'm leading your eye to the center of these images and letting that blur do its beautiful work. So all about pattern and symmetry. Texture. Texture can be your subject too. In both of these images, texture was what really drew me to these images. The image on the left is called Red Velvet Echeveria. It's one of my favorite succulents. And I love, this is in our greenhouse at Chicago Botanic, and it's been there for years. So I go back every year to photograph it over and over again. And it's interesting to me that it's called Red Velvet Echeveria, and I found that the velvet is my favorite lens to photograph it. And then a sunflower, again, filled with beautiful texture. Or maybe it's simply shape or color that's drawing you to a subject. This is a costus plant, and I was fascinated with this. I spent a lot of time with this plant because I loved the flow of that line. But I knew that I didn't have to have that all in focus for you to understand what this plant was like. So this is just a perfect example of what selective focus is. I'm using the Sol 45, which is a fixed aperture lens. It only shoots at 3.5 and has just beautiful blur. But I'm using that to draw your eye just to one part of this image, and that's the connection between the stem and the leaf, where you see that pop of red and that interesting shape. And I love photographing in this way. I find it creative, I find it exciting, and there are no better lenses to do this than Lensbaby. So Lensbaby really encourages me to push the boundaries between what is in focus and what is not. So the fern on the left was captured in a conservatory in a fern room. And I love this image. It's shot wide open at f1.6. I love it because it conveys the feeling of what it's like to be in a fern room. It's misty, your lenses fog up, it's warm in there, and that image perfectly captures that for me. And then the dahlia, I just have a little tiny bit in focus, so I'm really pushing that boundary. But again, I find this way of photographing very exciting and very creative, because the way that I see it may be very different than the way that you see it. We could have the same subject and come up with completely different compositions, completely different ideas about how to photograph it. You might take one of those petals and place your focus on the petal. Or, you know, there's no end to the way that you can photograph using selective focus. The possibilities are endless. So this really brings us back to the idea of photographing from your heart. We've come full circle now. And this is the whole meaning behind The Alchemist. The real treasure that we gain in our journey is not gold and jewels, but wisdom, self-knowledge, and finding our heart. And that is my wish for you, is that this presentation has really opened up your ideas of bringing your heart into your image and really further exploring your personal history, your emotional roadmap, so that you can do that and so that you can better understand why you photograph what you do and in the way that you do. So I want to leave with this idea. This is one of my favorite quotes, again, from this book. When we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. So when we strive to be a better artist and to photograph from our authentic self and from our heart, people will respond and people will be lifted up by your work. And when we live our lives with kindness and compassion, all those around us become better too. So that's the thought that I want to leave you with in this presentation. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will look forward to seeing you in the live portion so that I can answer all your questions about my presentation and about Lensbabies or anything that you want to talk about. So thank you. I'm really honored to have been here. All right, just let me end with just a couple other things. So this is my ebook, which is available at visualwilderness.com. And if you can't find it on their website, if you could just do a search for my name. But it's also linked through my personal website, AnneBelmontPhotography.com. And this is a book that I created about a year and a half ago. And it has, it's an illustrated guide to the Lensbaby lenses that I use for my flower photography. So it gives lots of tips. It explains the differences between the lenses and how to use them. It also gives a lot of my philosophy about flower photography and the way that I work. So that is something that may further your learning. I also want to make you aware of a presentation that I did in November with B&H Event Space. It's called Capturing the Magic of Flowers with Lensbaby. And if you do a search with the title, my name, and B&H Event Space, you will easily find it. And the reason that I'm suggesting this is that I wanted my presentation today to be about inspiration and to really get you thinking about your photography. But I didn't include a lot of tips or information about the lenses or how to use them. But this hour-long presentation goes into great depth with all that. So please feel free to find it on the internet and watch it, because it may help you understand the lenses and potentially understand what is a good fit for your photography. And then I'm always happy to hear from you. Please feel free to email me at my email here. I correspond with people almost every day. I answer questions about Lensbaby. I help people find the right fit. If you want to send me an image that inspires you or just talk flower photography, please feel free to reach out to me. I really relish this contact with people and have met some very special friends this way. I'm also very active on Instagram. I love the flower community on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, come follow me and reach out. And I'm also on Facebook, not quite as active there. But thank you again for joining me, and thank you to Lensbaby for having this wonderful presentation, and I'll see you soon.
Dreamy artistic images.
Emotive and soulful imagery.
That extra dimension and quirkiness.
Really unique images.
Se olvidaron completamente.
Extraordinary results.
Creamy bokeh and a dreamy feel.
Creative and quirky landscape.
Unique blur effect.
Fun flares.
Poetic, oniric look.
Something extraordinary.
Wow, shoot, extraordinary conference. If that wasn't inspirational, I don't know what is. And thank you so much for such an incredible presentation. Where do you start with this, right? I mean, there's so much we could unpack in this, and just, I don't know if you saw the comments through the chat, just people feeling inspired and people feeling like there's so much more beauty in the world than maybe they had an hour ago. And my own personal journey and legend being, tied to reading The Alchemist 6 years ago as I was changing everything that I knew about my life, and the power of that book. And I think the best place to start this conversation is, how do you arrive at that to go, okay, I'm going to dive in to this idea of The Alchemist and leverage that in this conversation?
I think it was a book that was on my reading list for years. And I think it was meant to be that I read it about 2 years ago at a time when I was really examining my journey in photography and my personal history and how it relates to what I do today, because I feel so strongly that that's important to our photography, that we bring our personal selves into our work. And that book just really resonated with me. You know, it was just like the journey that Santiago was on was kind of the journey that I was on. And I was really trying to bring my heart into my photography, bring my background as an art therapist into my photography. For a long time, I didn't really see the relationship between that career and what I do today. And it just kind of went off like a light bulb at some point. And I said, yeah, that's why you see your work the way you do. That's why, you know, you get emotional about your subjects. So, yeah.
It's very serendipitous also. You know, I remember someone handing me that book and them saying, you'll know when to read this. And it's sitting on my shelf for a very long time and me coming across it, grabbing it and going, oh, I get it now, right? And so much of that like does transform our understandings of who we are and very much our mission and journey in life. Shoot Extraordinary Conference, if you have questions for Anne, please leave them in the comments. We're going to spend a little bit of time here doing Q&A with her. Anne, the question that has come up probably 8 million times in this is, what is your favorite Lensbaby?
Oh.
You know I was going to ask.
I knew you were going to ask. Well, I'll tell you that the lens that I probably shoot with the most, and I know I was getting questions about, do you shoot full frame or crop sensor? I shoot full frame mirrorless. And so the Velvet 85 is the one that I reach for the most. It's just such a beautiful lens for flower photography. But, you know, I also use the Velvet 56. I also use the Velvet 28. I have a love affair with the Sol 45. A lot of my work is done with that lens, and I just, you know, that one totally caught me off guard. When I first got it, I thought, I don't know, fixed aperture. I'm all about experimenting with aperture, but that lens is a powerhouse, and I feel like a lot of my most creative work has come from that lens. So I love them all, but
yeah. Well, it's a hard declaration to make, right? But that's why we ask the challenging questions here at Lensbaby. So we have an awesome question for you here from Linda. And when you shoot indoors with natural light, do you place a texture paper behind the flowers?
You know, I don't do a lot of indoor shooting. I have to admit, it's just not where my heart is. In the winter, yes. In the winter, normally I'm shooting in conservatories, which kind of mimic being outdoors anyway because they have glass ceilings. So I can just take advantage of the natural light there and just shoot as if I were in a garden. But as far as shooting at home, I don't do a lot of it. Yes, I do have some textures that I place behind my subjects when I do shoot at home, but my true love is being outdoors. As I mentioned in my presentation, really the most powerful part of what I do is the process of creating. And for me, that's so intensely tied up with being outdoors in nature. I just have such a great love for being outdoors. So it's most of my work is done, you know, in a garden setting. And
yeah.
I'm lucky that I live 10 minutes from a garden.
Yeah, and I hope that we can all take advantage of the areas that are close to us. Sometimes we think we have to travel the world and hop on a plane and do all these things, but sometimes it's our own backyard where we can find the most creativity.
Oh, I mean, that was totally eye-opening to me this spring when I was forced to, you know, recreate myself and you know, head out into my neighborhood. I had no idea how much I would find, how much joy was there. And because in normal circumstances I would be in a conservatory setting during the winter, but I can't this winter because they're all closed. So I've kind of dedicated myself to a project that I started, a few weeks ago, where I'm going out and shooting all the lovely dead crap. There's a Instagram page called that.
Yeah.
There is such beauty in flowers as they die, in leaves as they curl, in seed pods. You just have to be willing to get a little cold if you live in a climate like I do in Chicago. But I'm having so much fun, connecting with a very different kind of subject.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing. And so much of it is that connecting and creating and trying something and getting out of your comfort zone. And we're running out of time, but I really want to ask one more question before we move on. And Anne, do you use flash in your flower photography or just natural light?
99.9% natural light. I have experimented with a macro ring light for, if you see the panel behind me, I did a commission project for the Orchid Show for 3 years in a row, and had the challenge of shooting orchids in an orchid show where there was no light. So it kind of forced me to experiment with flash, but it's not my favorite way to shoot. It's work sometimes, but natural light is really what I love. So
amazing. And thank you so much for being here. Such an incredible presentation. I want to actually dive into it with you more. I wish we had more time right now. I think we'll have to do that after for sure. Shoot Extraordinary Conference, thank you so much for being here, for being a part of this, for being a part of our journey. Please like and comment and share and let everybody know we're still going. We have 3 more presentations today. And Anne, I don't know about you, but I'm super excited.
Oh, they've all been fantastic.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. Shoot Extraordinary Conference, thank you for being here. And thank you so much. We will be back in just a few minutes.
Hey, thank you, everyone.